Good morning, and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners Agenda Setting Work Session. We'll start with introductions. I'm John Hutchings, and this is
Ty Mincer.
And
Gary Edwards.
Robin Campbell, Assistant County Manager.
Ramiro Chavez, County Manager.
Thomasina Cooper, Assistant Time Mixer.
and at the table in front of us,
Joshua Cummings, CPED.
Brad Murphy, Community Planning.
And Andrew DeFobis, Community Planning.
and on the bench, and great support staff. Thank you. So this morning we're going to start off with a discussion on and briefing on the Conservation Futures funding proposals. And if I didn't give the date, it is August 27th, 2019. So you want to start framing this, Romero?
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. Just to make a point, there's a little bit of an unusual meeting, although there is an agenda setting on the calendar. We don't have an agenda setting. You reviewed the agenda for today's meeting yesterday. And the reason that you reviewed the agenda for today's meeting yesterday is an offsite meeting, that's a special meeting, and that agenda needed to be posted final 24 hours in advance. So, and that is the way that I split those two agenda settings. So you have remaining items today. Hopefully you can cover those in the next hour. And I believe at that time you will convene at 10:15 to continue the budget conversation for the rest of the day, working through lunch as well. One of the remaining items for your decision is the 2019 Conservation Futures funding proposals. As a matter of background, the board a couple of years ago made a decision to hold the revenues from the Thurston, from the Conservation Futures property tax portion to set aside to potentially in the future purchase property for the habitat conservation plan related to the Mazama pocket gopher. That decision was made probably 18 months ago. And as a result, the normal grant cycle of the conservation futures was stopped. Last year, there were two projects that were not able to perform based on the grant assignments that were given prior to the board making that decision to stop the grant cycle. And those were the Monarch Park and the Fry Cove, both equated to just about $500,000. The board had a conversation last year, and at that point decided to take the $500,000 and make it available for grant proposals during the 2019 funding cycle. You directed the staff to go through that process. The board reviewed the selection criteria for those potential projects, in which you emphasize that perhaps the potential mitigation for the habitat conservation plan should be part of the discussion as part of the selection. It was not the only element in which the selection criteria was stated. It was an add-on point. Also, you directed the staff to convene a stakeholder group where they can help review those applications before they come to you as a final recommendation. A group of stakeholders met and staff facilitated those meetings. You receive a briefing related to the proposal by the steering committee, as I called, who reviewed the applications 2 weeks ago. And the result of that, they provided you with 3 options of funding. Option number 1 includes 2 projects, Bird Cove, which the funding request was $400,000, and this is included in this table, right here in your packet. And they proposed award on the option 1 to fully fund this proposal for $400,000. The next was a home farm. The initial request was $151,839, and the option 1 is to fully fund $151,839. The result of that is it goes beyond the $500,000 allowable, and the committee recommended option number 1, considering that perhaps you may exercise to go beyond the $500,000 that you have set aside for this ranking. Option number 2 it stays within the $500,000 allocation, and in this case, the Bird Cove is recommended to be funded at a full amount of $400,000, and the home farm is recommended to be funded by $100,000, a reduction of $51,839. And option number 3 splits the difference between the two applications to stay within the $500,000. And the result of that on the option number 3 is Bird Cove will be proposed to be funded at $348,161, and Home Farm $151,839. That was the proposal the staff presented to you a couple of weeks ago. During your conversation, you asked a couple of questions. The response to those questions are in here, but at this point, I'd like to give the floor to staff to walk you through, I believe, 2 questions the board requested, and we have answers to those questions today. Did I miss anything on?
No, that's great. Thank you, County Manager Chavez. So Joshua Cummings, again, Community Planning and Economic Development. Before I hand the microphone over to our lead staff on this, I wanted to again say this is CPED's honor to move forward in carrying out the direction of the Board of County Commissioners and facilitating the discussion with the Citizen Ranking Committee. So this isn't staff's recommendation. This is the recommendation of the Ranking Committee that was working within the boundaries of the guidance from the Board of County Commissioners to use that $500,000 allocation and what, from their perspective, would be the best use of those funds. So just make sure that we're always on the same page, that CPED is the facilitator of a broad conversation to lead towards a path forward. In terms of those questions, I'll pass the mic over to Andy DeFobis and to address those topics.
Good morning. So I took down some questions from the last board briefing and have done what research I can do into those topics at this time. So the board had questions about what would be the development potential or the developability of these parcels. That is a fairly difficult question to answer unless you were to go out and walk all these properties in total, look at the critical area limitations that are on them, et cetera, because the critical areas present, like wetlands or floodplains, affects the density to which some of these sites can be developed, or the zoning can affect that as well. So what we can say in general is that all of these sites have the potential to see some degree of development. The county provides for reasonable use of all properties. What we can't say is to what degree any one of these properties would be built out. That would also depend on who owns them and what they wish to see on the property. But what I can say is we did go and look in A6, the electronic permit system, and we don't see anything pending for any of these properties. So at this time, to our knowledge, there are no active applications to develop these properties, but in theory, any of them could see development in the future if they're not protected. And the other piece, so as we know, there's one property that potentially provides mitigation for a species proposed to be covered under the Habitat Conservation Plan, and that's the home farm property for the Oregon spotted frog. And the board had general questions about whether any of these properties would provide any other mitigation potential, and there really isn't any that staff is aware of. So we went back and looked at it, and we looked at the species that are present on the site or documented to be there. Other than the Oregon spotted frog, the only other listed species staff are aware of are salmon on some of these properties, or I think actually all of them may have a salmon nexus. But essentially, we are unaware of any demand for credits for those species. I went and talked to Public Works and to our stormwater folks as well to see what projects might the county have that might impact any of this habitat, and is there any need for mitigation? And there really isn't. And at this time, it's also unclear as to what the crediting mechanism would look like for any of those species. So to our knowledge, at this time, there is not really a mitigation potential that we can realize on these properties, other than the potential for Oregon spotted frog if that were to come to fruition down the line. So,
You want to walk through the other two questions related to reaching out to some of the potential proponents and some of the feedback?
yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, I did hear from both sponsors. Nisqually Land Trust declined to provide additional comment, but Capital Land Trust did provide an email. Tom Woodruff did. He was the sponsor, the lead for the Home Farm project. And to sum up his comments, he essentially said that he did not want to see the rankings changed or anything like that, that the process is important and to uphold that process. He said he fully supports option one, and even if that, fully supports option one, but would also support option two, again, going with that ranking by the ranking committee. The best option, as he states it, though not presented, would be to fully fund all proposals, but that's something we hear every year, and I will leave that with the board. That's what I heard from those sponsors.
And you have a copy in your packet of that email.
Right.
You also had a request, I believe, whether the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife informed the county whether the project of Scatter Creek was going through. It was dropped out of this request, I believe, and it was the State Department informed the county their intent to pursue an RCO grant. Staff made a research on that, although perhaps the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is required to notify some of the stakeholders, including the county, in the potential grant applications, and that is stated on RCW 79.8.15.110. Staff couldn't find any notification that it was given to the county, and that goes back probably 2014, 2015, when this application was submitted. So I believe that's all the questions the board asked, but if there's any additional questions, staff and myself are here to answer.
Okay, do you have any questions to start with?
Can you go back, because when you started to explain that, I wasn't tracking,
Okay.
and then halfway through, I remember this was Commissioner Edwards' question about notice. Can you repeat what you said about the application for RTO grant?
Yeah, under normal circumstances, when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is planning to apply for an RCO grant,
Excuse me, it's the state.
the state,
That's
with an
required under the
RCO grant, they are required to notify some of the stakeholders, including the county, as to the intent and what is the purpose. The result of that, the RCO grant funding mechanism is intended to have a broad perspective as to what the intent and purpose of that investment will be. In this particular case, we didn't find any documentation. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife notified the county of their intent to apply for RCO monies for the Scatter Creek project. And that was one of the projects that it was eliminated from this competition. And that was the question, I believe, why the proponent dropped the request from Conservation Futures, because they submitted an application, I believe. And on their own, they decided to drop off. And the question as to why, and the response, as you may recall, was because they went and secured an RCO grant, so they didn't need money from the Conservation Futures. And at that point, the conversation went in terms of, did they notify the county of their intent to notify RCO, the county as a result of the RCO. So that's the questions that I had. But if you have any additional questions before I facilitate your decision.
Okay, go ahead, Gary.
And that's happened before on properties that we've been looking at, isn't that right?
I couldn't.
To the property down at Tenino, the Tenino Ranch, we were never notified.
On the Tenino Ranch, the RCO, we participated on a letter.
Eventually,
and
after we raised that question.
And as you may recall, the regional director participating on a briefing with you, with the board last year, where at that point is where the county submitted a letter of support. And also we saw the opportunity to expand the purchase on the property across the road from the main purchase, where we, the county, found a potential habitat conservation plan mitigation property. So we did submit it, but I think the history was a couple missteps in there, yes.
And then this is another misstep. We can't find a record that we were ever notified that there was a potential.
But I do believe with the new leadership, they're making an effort to reach out to the county. And I'm hopeful.
I'm
that will
not
continue.
arguing that point. I'm just, it bothers me that something was removed that could have been mitigation for the problem this county is facing on the prairie species, specifically the pocket gopher. That's been this board's priority, that we wanted to do something for the citizens of Thurston County. And by taking that off of the potential purchase list, we're not going to get any mitigation benefit for those citizens that are under duress. And that's my concern here. I did have a meeting last week with the state Fish and Game folks, and it was very productive. And they are very interested in partnering, and there's a possibility that we still might be able to be involved in that purchase and then receive mitigation. But we're not there yet because we were caught flat-footed on this whole process. And that's my concern with the process, is that we're potentially moving ahead contrary to what the board had originally decided to do when we were looking for mitigation benefit.
So
that's kind of where I'm at.
So the next steps on and I believe is related to the purchase of what we call the Dr. Burnett property in the Tenino area. And that's where the Department of Fish and Wildlife received an RCO grant to purchase that property. The grant that they receive through the legislative process this year is not enough to purchase the entire property, as I understand. And there is already scheduled a meeting with all the stakeholders on September 6th to start talking about the means and methods to start purchasing that property as well as the other property the county is interested. They perhaps can provide mitigation credits for the pocket gopher, for the HCP as a whole. So Josh Cummins is going to be attending that meeting on September 6th, representing the county, so we can start beginning the conversation as to how we can partner with Fish and Wildlife on that purchase.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate the conversation on the multiple different ways to try and impact positively for citizens of Thurston County in the gopher topic. I want to make sure that it's clear we've got all these moving pieces and parts, and they're all kind of interconnected. But for this case specifically, what we're talking about with Conservation Futures, our staff facilitated the conversation of the applications that were provided to then put together a ranking committee to decide what recommendation that ranking committee would like to have in honoring the board's direction for Conservation Futures specifically. So I want to make sure that we kind of, while they're connected, they're also separate for the board's decision in terms of the Conservation Futures. Staff can only reply and respond to applications that were provided, and then can only present those that move forward in the process. We don't have the authority to withdraw or remove the Scatter Creek. That was the applicant's decision, not ours. So as we think about narrowing the scope of this conversation to the Conservation Futures decision, based on the board's direction to spend the $500,000 in honor of the goals within Conservation Futures, one of those is habitat mitigation, but there are a whole host of other items that this program is set to assist with. So I just want to make sure that we keep in our minds the multiple pieces that are moving here and narrow the scope of this decision to the Conservation Futures Ranking Committee's recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners.
For the $500,000.
As
Which
directed.
to me, at base level, $500,000 knocks out number one, option number one.
And maybe elaborating as to what Josh just stated, the criteria in which the board back in 2018 approved, the rating criteria is included on your packet. And just for the public's interest, let me just read the criteria in which the selection committee concluded on providing you those options for your consideration. The ranking criteria included does the project fit program objectives, and the program has the own objectives in terms of the conservation features. Is the project is time sensitive, has a little bit of sensitivity as to when that purchase needs to occur. Does the project preserve critical habitat, unique natural features, historical or cultural resources, agricultural, forestry, land, certainty of project success, meaning all the partners' funding are in place in order to be successful on the investment of the conservation futures money. What level of match is provided? Does the project include public access? And in yellow, as stated on the overhead, is the additional criteria the board added to that, which is does the project have mitigation potential? That is the ranking criteria. And again, the board approved last year, in which staff went on and went through the process of receiving proposals. And the selection committee went through this criteria that resulted in the proposals before you. Do you have any?
Yeah, you have a question?
Just kind of a follow-up to Commissioner Hutchings' question. If we adopted option one, this might be a Robin question,
Yeah.
but
Budget.
which goes, I mean, the additional $51,000 comes from,
Conservation futures, and you have a significant fund balance on that. So that is not it's not a question whether you have capacity on the conservation futures. No, you do have capacity.
So I have a question regarding that one criteria says
It's just
certainty
about
of
the capacity.
project success. And so that was ranked, the certainty of project success. And I won't call it a reduction of funding, but not fully funding. I'd rather call it rather than reducing. But option number two, if home farm is reduced by $51,839, is there certainty of project success still?
It reduces their certainty.
It reduces their certainty.
What they've communicated to us is that they would potentially not be able to bring the full acreage currently envisioned for that project to the table. They would only be able to pay for what our funding would allow. I don't believe they expect that they will be able to use any additional sources of funding. I think they're maxed out with what they think they can bring to the table.
Okay. And I just want to, I'm in my head, if we're saying this is the amount of money that we have to award, and someone asks for this much, I don't consider this of this board, well, we're going to reduce that. No, this is the maximum. I'm not reducing your award. This is the max we're allotting. So just antics with semantics. It says, or reduce the award. But they put in for more than they wanted, or not wanted, but more than was asked or available.
Right.
Go ahead, do you have a question? You got more?
Well, I guess what I would like to point out is that Mr. Tibetan took it on himself to come up with hundreds of signatures the other day of citizens from South County that are very concerned that we aren't doing enough to solve this whole mitigation, HCP, pocket gopher process, whatever you want to refer to it as. And he did that in a couple of days, just by putting a couple of signature forms out that he had drafted some verbiage for. It wasn't done electronically, as far as I know, so it was never done on the net. Just in a few days, they came up with, I don't know, close to 300 signatures. I think it was 3 days and 300 signatures. And I think it's a slap in the face to be premature to those folks in the Rochester area that are the most impacted individuals by this process, to move forward and make a purchase when we don't know that we'll get any mitigation benefit to help those citizens with that problem. down in South County. And I just think we're jumping the gun here by moving forward on this until we figure out if we can get some benefit. We've got that property down there at Mazama Meadows. That's been hanging fire down there at the legal office at U.S. Fish and Wildlife in Portland now for almost a year, maybe more than a year, waiting to get an answer back. Those folks seem to be very willing to drag their feet. We seem to be jumping in ahead of time, in my estimation. I think we need some answers so that we can come up to a solution for those citizens that are dramatically impacted. So that's, I'm not in favor of moving forward with this at this point in time until we get more answers from, mainly from the state and then also from the feds on whether or not we can develop mitigation on these purchases. So that's kind of where I'm at.
With regard to what Commissioner Edwards just said, I empathize with Mr. Tibetan, and he's not in any different position now than he was last year when this board decided to put that money forward as an RFP out there, that $500,000. And so, again, I don't want to hold this process or this these options hostage to what is going on in South County, in Rochester specifically, because that still is going to move forward one way or the other. But I don't think it has anything to do with, I don't get the connection here with what we're doing today, because we decided as a board last year to put this $500,000 forward and have everybody go through the process. So I'm willing to move on with it, though. That's where I am.
Well,
Yeah,
just
let me
on
go back
that, my perspective is the fact that we've held this money, that we're only allocating $500,000 because it was returned from other projects is a massive commitment to the people of South County and the people that have been impacted by the pocket gopher. It's been a huge commitment by this board over a period of last few years, and so I don't see that it is a slap in the face at all to do what the previous board determined to do and award these. And you did the additional step of adding the mitigation as a criteria, so it was part of the calculus as to what these ranking committee options came out to be. So I feel that it's appropriate to move forward.
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay. Again, I think the main thing for me is that we recognize that we did, when we made that decision last year to put this money forward, we emphasized that the priority was going to be on prairie mitigation credits, and that was going to get the higher listing, higher priority, I guess. And in this case, the state kind of underhandedly, if you will, because they did not follow the RCW, they did not notify us ahead of time that this was something coming up on this property. What was the name of that property down there that we're referring to?
Scatter Creek Edition. Yeah.
What was?
Scatter Creek.
Scatter Creek, yeah. The uniqueness there was that that is in close proximity to other prairie habitat, and the bigger the parcel that we end up setting aside for habitat conservation, the more likelihood we'll have success. So again, that's, I believe we're premature in moving forward. And yes, Mr. Tibetan is in the same spot that he was last year, but we committed that we would recognize the potential for mitigation during this selection. And so, because that's been kind of stolen from us, if you will, I just feel we're premature. So that's the democratic process at work here, I guess.
And I'm with you with Mr. Tibetan, and I'm with you with State Fish and Wildlife in what they have neglected to do in notifying us. But if I told my son, I'm giving you $10 allowance every month, and he said, well, I want 15. I said, no, I'm giving you 10. I wouldn't accept it if he said, I'm going to give you you're giving me, Dad, you're giving me a 50% reduction. Because that's what he wanted. So again, I just go back to this, it's not a reduction of the board of an award. We allotted a certain amount.
I guess I'd follow up on that saying, well, I'd be real concerned if he was buying alcohol with it instead of gasoline.
What?
You know. So
Do you have another
we could get a lot of things going on that.
question on that or answer? Okay. Go ahead, Robin.
So I understand that there was a question about capacity in the fund, and I appreciate your desire to limit the award to the amount that the board put forward. However, I do want to just tell you that when I stepped out, I went to get the financial plan for this fund, which is on your agenda to review tomorrow morning. At the end of 2019, we are projecting an ending fund balance of approximately $4.1 million. That includes an assumption that you would spend $2 million on habitat land acquisition and conservation, which is not going to happen this year. So we're going to have an ending fund balance this year of
$6 million.
$6 million, over $6 million, because this $500,000, should you award it, won't be spent till next year. So at the end of next year, we will have over $6 million in the bank. And that is also assuming another $1 million in spending in 2020 on habitat land. So this fund has capacity for whatever you choose of these options. There is money sitting here. There's also a $50,000 earmark that we used to call Commissioner Challenge projects. We just earmarked $50,000 every year for just in case something came up that the board wanted to spend a little bit of conservation money on. So that's there for you as well. Just saying that there's
Can you go back to
plenty of
this
capacity in this
Go
fund.
back to this slide.
But the board still put it out for 500,000, knowing what the capacity
You
is.
did, and I would just say that there are quite a few grant opportunities that the board publishes, such as historic preservation, the LTAC money for growing visitors coming into our county. This fund has a history of awarding more than the board published if a fund has capacity.
Okay.
I would just point out that the home farm project, which landed second, I mean, they weren't asking for more than, it's just that they landed second after a $400,000 project that came out first. So it's not like, I don't think the analogy of your son
No.
asking for more than what was, his allowance is really apt because each one of the projects fits
Oh, I
within
get it,
the
I get what
budget.
you're saying, okay.
And the fact that home farm came second and the most expensive project came first put them where they were a little
Put 'em where I
short.
get, now I get it. Yeah, I get that. I don't get the alcohol thing, but I get what you're saying.
I get the alcohol.
Ramiro?
Thank you. I was just going to state just about the same because the applicants didn't have that threshold. The applicant was given, if there's $500,000 available, you have projects, and they submitted projects with what they perceive to be inadequate funding. None of the requests went beyond the $500,000, and it's just the ranking criteria and the suggestions by the ranking committee. It just happens to be over by $51,000.
Got it.
So you heard you have a capacity on the fund. Now, let me take a couple of steps back just to make sure the public understands that you do have the three options provided to you, but also it's another option, and is the do nothing option they always have, you have as a board, is the do nothing option. So I just want to clarify that as well, that you're not bound to go through these three options. You have another option, which is the do nothing. With that in mind, I would like to hear how the board would like to move forward on this. And if I may, let me go back to the other option that you have, the do nothing. So let me ask you, is the board intended to award the 2019 Conservation Futures Grants?
No,
Okay.
I'm not interested in moving
can-
forward.
I
I'd
didn't see
like
what
to
you did.
have,
You say, yeah?
I would like to have just a little more background information so people know where we're at on this. We submitted an HCP more than a year ago. I think it was about 14 months ago. And I believe it was about 12 months ago, or about a year ago, after, and that came about after we submitted the HCP, that we recognized that, because we had been approached by some of the conservation groups that have said, well, we've got this other money, you know, how would we be interested in spending that? At that point in time, we said yes. We wanted to continue with the conservation program. And that's been about a year ago. And even then, we did put in there that it was going to be a priority if we recognized that there would be mitigation potential. But that didn't happen. And I believe the board at that time felt that within that year, we were going to hear something back from U.S. Fish and Wildlife about our HCP plan, which we did not for well over a year. And now we're trying to scramble to get that fixed. But when we came in this, when the new board came in that made that decision in January of 2017, we were faced with a $153 million agreement to deal with the habitat plan at that point in time, which we then massaged around and came up with something more to the tune of about $50 million that we thought maybe we could make work. So when we talk about we have under $10 million or something in this fund, granted, that seems like a lot of money and that we ought to be able to do a lot with it. But we're still under the thumb or the heel, however you want to put it, of U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They have not agreed to an HCP plan. We do not know how much that's going to cost yet. And I believe it's just a mistake from a financial standpoint. And again, we're going to leave the citizens hanging if we can't come out and fund an adequate HCP that's given back to us from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So
You said you want more information. What information do you need
I
to
want
make this decision?
I want more information about the potential for being able to get mitigation, whether that's from this decision that we're wanting to make today, whether it's the Mazama Meadows thing that's being held up by U.S. Fish and Wildlife with their legal office that's been over a year down in Portland, or the HCP, or if we will be able to utilize some of this funding when we make joint purchases because of the Section 6 restrictions
Okay.
that the feds
Maybe
have.
just to, in an attempt to answer your question, Commissioner Edwards, on September 27th, during the planning session, I already have 2 items on your agenda for discussion. And it will be in the morning. One will be how the board would like to move forward on the 2020 Conservation Future Grant funding cycle. In the second, staff from CPED and Public Works will come to you with a proposal as to how we can systematically start purchasing property that brings mitigation value to the potential habitat conservation plan. And that is important for you to go through that process, and if you agree with that proposal, because we as a government agency, we cannot just jump on an opportunity to purchase a property that has mitigation potential. We need to follow a due process, including appraisal and everything else, before we can even make an offer. But having a proactive approach is perhaps what the board may consider after you hear some proposals on September 27th. So if I may, going back to your decision, the ranking committee suggested to you the option number 1 is the one they recommend for you to support as a board. That includes an additional $51,839 from the $500,000 that you set aside. You heard from Robin, there is capacity, enough capacity in the fund if you choose to move and support this proposal. So I'd like to ask the board as to how you would like to move forward in option number 1.
I support option 1.
I do not support moving forward on any of the options at this point in time. So.
And I would like to say to anybody from Home Farm, my apologies for misspeaking, thinking they were asking for more than was allotted. It makes sense to me that they were not. And I support option number 1.
Okay. So we move forward with option number 1. Thank you, Commissioners. The next step in the process, I stand corrected. It does not need a formal Board of County Commissioners action on AIS. This action is sufficient to move forward. What you will see next, it will be an agreement. They will come before you in which you perhaps delegate that authority to the director to sign that agreement and award the dollars. So you will see that coming up. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is under Commissioner items, revision to the Thurston County Code, Chapter 15.06, stormwater rates. A discussion.
Good morning, Commissioners.
morning.
Jennifer Walker, Thurston County Public Works Director. And we are going to talk to you about, we're going to review some proposed changes to Thurston County Code 1506, stormwater, storm and surface water utility rates. So Zainab is going to walk you through the specific changes that we're proposing and a little bit of background as to what those impacts will
You
be
have a
on the
document
changes. So
here.
you should have a packet of those details. Primary reasons are to clear up some technical corrections, make sure that we're in alignment with the code, the original intent of it. And then there was some concern that there was interpretation that the language that's currently in there could mean that we were trying to sunset it at the end of 2019. And so we're trying to clear that up.
Hi, am I supposed to introduce
Go
myself?
for it.
Okay. I'm Zainab Najati, utility planner with Thurston County Public Works.
Yeah, I can introduce myself. So Tim Wilson, the stormwater utility manager, is on vacation, so he asked me to sit in for him to introduce this, and I guess mainly because I had a little bit more history, having been with utility for 10 years, so. If any sidebar questions come up, maybe I have an answer.
And your name
So
is?
who are you, Pat?
Oh, my name. Oh. Yeah. I'm Pat Allen. So.
Thank you. We were waiting.
Okay. So if you flip over to the second page of your packet, I'm just gonna go through each of the 7 changes, proposed changes to Thurston County Code, Chapter 1506. So the first one is definition of commercial and industrial. We're suggesting that we add primary use to the definition so that it becomes, for commercial and industrial, is any parcel that doesn't have a primary use as residential, and removing the portion of the code which states provided, however, that the property on which a home-based industry or home occupation as provided in Chapter 20.54 is considered residential, because in our zoning code, home-based industry and home occupations are subordinate uses. And so if the primary use is residential, automatically they would still be residential even if they have a home business on the property. For the second item, definition of vacant property, we want to make a small modification that says, to change the definition to be vacant property is property which total building square footage of 120 square feet or less and devoid of other impervious surfaces. And we are suggesting that change because the way it is currently written, it makes it appear as if it's or. So if you don't have any buildings on the property, but say your entire lot was paved, you would fit under that definition of like you have less than 120 square feet of building, but that's clearly not what a vacant property is meant to be. So third item, we are adding a line under section 1506.030 stating that each property only belongs to a single class. So after we talked with the legal department, they found that it would be a good clarification to make, because that's currently how we are billing individuals. Then,
Hang on, just before you get into number 4 then, do we have questions on number 1, 2, or 3? Before we get too far away?
Well, when I say questions, I'm not sure what we're going to be asked here in a few minutes. That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, so the next step on this is just to give you an overview on that proposal. The staff is coming to you, and the next step will be for staff to for you to consider setting a public hearing. And
To address these issues.
To address these issues, and after you receive public testimony, then you will be in the position to support or not, or modify the proposals the staff is bringing to you.
So I'm going to guess that we're going to have more discussion on this particular issue. I mean, we're getting kind of a high-level briefing right now of what's to come.
Yeah, this is the introduction, yes.
Okay, so
Well,
I'm,
what I would say is that it'll be dependent upon what questions you may have.
or what comments come from the public as well.
Yeah.
Right, so our ask would be, we would be coming back to see if we could set a public hearing,
Yeah.
and that's when we would get comments from.
And I guess my initial concern is, because I'm no expert in this, but have you been working in conjunction with any potential affected parties? And I don't really know who that might be. It might be someone that wants to build a home, or might be a developing firm, might be an engineering firm that might be impacted in one fashion or another, so we get a broad perspective of the impact it might have on the community. That's more my concern than knowing about these individual changes at this point in time. So what would be the answer to that question? Where are we at on that?
so we haven't been in communication with the potentially affected property owners, but I think it's important to understand the majority of these changes are more clarifications into the existing code to clear up like issues that interpretation issues that have come up, and they're for the most part consistent with how we're currently billing individuals, with the exception of the change item number 5, which I haven't covered yet.
Okay, I guess my concern is that oftentimes what the government might feel is appropriate or needed, or what in comparison with private industry, for an example, oftentimes doesn't mesh. That's why I like to include that private sector, if you will, at those early stages, so that we don't make a misstep somewhere along the line.
Yes, and I think once we go through in detail, instead of saying, trust us, it's not gonna have an impact, we wanna walk you through it so you can see what the proposed changes are and what those potential impacts would be. And so I think it'd be good to go through that so you can see that, as opposed to us telling you.
Okay.
And this is just, like you mentioned, this is just an overarching briefing on the proposed changes, but there's a whole process to get through. Okay, did you have any comments?
I think I understand 2 and 3 pretty well. Not just so I'm clear on number 1, we're basically saying that a home business is going to fall under residential. It's not, so there's clarity there.
Well,
Is that
so
right?
it
Because the
it
primary use of that property is residential.
Yeah, so currently, any home-based industry is residential, and it would remain so. It's more just, it's redundant language, because our zoning code already states that home-based industry is a subordinate use to a primary use of residential.
Okay.
Maybe the bill format of the changes
Yeah.
to the codes is where probably gives a little more.
Okay, I'm with
substance
you.
in there.
We're up to 4.
So let's go to 4, yeah, let's move on then, through 4, thank you.
So change number 4, under base rates, so your table, we are clarifying that in order to fall into class of property 1, you can only have single-family residences on your property, and just 1. Number 5, and this is probably the one that has the most impact, this is, if you go.
Could I ask a question about that, Joe?
Okay.
Okay, we're talking about developing something for affordable housing that has to do with ADUs in this county, and I don't know where we're at on that, but could that run afoul of what the board's intent is to create the ability to have affordable housing.
ADU.
Auxiliary dwelling
Accessory
unit.
Accessory
dwelling
dwelling unit.
Yeah. I see, that's kind of why I'm
I-
concerned that
I-
we not rush.
Right.
We
No,
don't
no,
rush.
the intent is not to rush you, Commissioner.
I know.
The intent is to provide you some information, and at least my reading of the proposed changes will not have an impact on you allowing ADUs. This is really providing the structure as to how we implement the stormwater charges to every single property in the county. And through the process that we have implemented this stormwater fee, we have found there is some opportunities for us to change the code to clarify that. But the intent has not changed. And these proposed changes will not have a negative effect on your intent to provide affordable housing.
No, I know, but our intent isn't to cause that a problem, but is the verbiage gonna cause the problem without us intending to do so? That's all I'm asking.
So it's my understanding that this isn't building code. This is how you determine the rates that are
It's just
applied
structure.
for stormwater fees.
Okay.
Yeah.
But will they be contrary to one another when it's all said and
It
done?
doesn't look
Okay.
like
Okay.
it.
Probably not.
Okay, good enough.
Did you finish number 4?
I think so.
Okay.
Unless there are further questions?
Yeah.
Number 5?
Number 5, so we are proposing to remove the exemption for use code 79 parcels. So the use code 79 parcels, they were exempted from stormwater fees back in 2000 with resolution 12361, with the understanding that these spaces represented community open spaces, residential well sites, and community green belts. However, use code 79, and use codes are state use codes, so we follow their system. Use code 79 is actually cultural resources other. And so the way that code is currently being used, it includes a lot of other things than just community open spaces and green belts. And so as a result, if you can see on your sheet, there's some images of parcels which are currently listed under use code 79, and so they're not being billed stormwater fees, so like roads, clubhouses, things like that, which is not the intent when those use codes were originally exempted. And so what we're suggesting is that use code 79 no longer be exempted, with the understanding that most of those, so the parcels that are currently actually like community green spaces, for instance, those parcels either fall under another exemption in our code, or their bill generally is gonna be less than $2, and our minimum bill amount is $2. So at the end of the day, of the 376 parcels that are currently use code 79 that receive a stormwater bill, 43 of those parcels would now receive a bill, primarily because they are actually roads and clubhouses. And something to understand is that if you were a road and you were not under a use code 79 listed, you are currently getting a stormwater fee. So it's also a matter of equity between different parcel owners in our county.
Can you repeat that last sentence that you just said?
The fact, if you're a road and you're not a use code 79, then you are currently getting a bill. So it's just so
You're
that-
saying some roads are, some roads aren't.
Yeah, so if you're up here, this parcel where it says private roadway, so that one is currently not receiving a bill, but if its use code was different, it would be receiving a bill. For whatever reason, it was assigned a use code 79 code.
So they're not receiving,
No,
but they will.
they would with this change,
They would
with the change.
with this change
with removing
of
the
a minimum
exemption.
of $2?
Well, they would have so other parcels, so like ones that are actually green spaces, those parcels are charged at the vacant parcel rate, and so they get charged like $1 per acre, but our minimum bill is $2.
Right.
So they actually, at the end of the day, those parcels would not get a bill, but these parcels would get charged now so the private roadway, for example, would get charged at the rate of class of property number 5, so they would be charged the $533 per 1,000 square feet of impervious.
That's as clear as mud.
I am getting so doggone confused. Why don't you go ahead and,
No, and I can probably, what is the objective of
confused?
this?
I got it, I got it.
So,
Okay.
so the objective of the change is that when, what the use code 79 is currently being used for, and what it was, I think, used for maybe back in 2000 when the parcels were originally exempted, has changed, it would appear. So it's no longer just use code 79 parcels, or no longer just community greenbelts, or just open space. They now, for whatever reason, will occasionally include roads
Or
and
they
other
have been,
things.
they
So-
have been developed, and we're
Right.
trying to capture those developments by
That's the
reducing
point.
the exceptions.
The
Yeah, that could
appropriate-
be why. They
Okay.
could have been developed since they were originally given that use code 79. And so I used the private roadway one example because it's pretty clear. So say this parcel at the time, say 10 years ago, it had a use code 79 and now it has a road on it. They're still not getting a bill because they're use code 79, but any other HOA or anyone else like that in the county who has a private roadway, they're getting a bill because they don't have the use code 79.
So could this be considered to be more of a cleanup type of change?
Yeah, I guess the way that I see it is that the understanding of what a use code 79 parcel is was incorrect, perhaps when they originally gave it the exemption, and now that we've taken a closer look at it, we see that that is not actually the case, and it doesn't meet the intent of why it was exempted back in 2000.
Because you're, so, I mean,
still have something to say?
you're saying eliminate this use code, is that what you're saying?
Well, eliminate the use code exemption. So,
Because you could, in theory, just accurately apply it, right? I mean, it says here, community open space, residential well site, community greenbelt. Obviously, the road is not any of those things, unless you're saying that it's a greenbelt with a road in it.
no, so our exemption right now in the code, if you look under, under section F, which is currently crossed out,
Where's it, what page are
Where
you
were you
on?
looking at?
Yeah, where are you?
the second to last page of your packet. If you flip, if you look
Yeah.
under,
Right.
gosh. Yeah, next time we will have page numbers.
E?
15
Letter-
Section E.
Letter E?
Well, F, actually. It's under F, the part that's currently crossed off
Okay.
as red line. If you look at number 6, it says parcels with a tax use code of number 79. So we're not able to just make that change to just apply it to open space, like open spaces, and charge those private roadways, for example, because there's still a tax use code of 79.
Oh, that's just, the tax use code is designated in some other place, not by
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't do that.
I gotcha,
And nor do we, we're not, we
understood.
don't assign it to parcels or.
You can't take it away, it's there based on tax code.
Yeah, correct.
Got it.
Go ahead, Commissioner Edwards.
Well, I'm sure you folks deal in this, and so you understand it better than we do.
What page are you on?
I'm back to attachment 1. As we move forward, you had said if we were a road, which I take it, you mean the owner of a particular road would get a bill? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and usually that's an HOA.
Homeowners association.
So most of this is directed towards a homeowners association. Is that it?
Correct.
What about situations where there's a shared roadway or something like that? I mean, what do you do in that case? Is
well-
that another bugaboo or?
So, that is an interesting situation that is gonna come up in the next item. But, usually, most private roadways have a billing address with, the assessor's office, and so we mail the bill to that address, and my understanding is, I guess the homeowners get together and they all pay their bill.
I don't know the answer to that, but I know that the county is pretty strict about ingress and egress to a county road, for an example. So sometimes they require a joint ownership. And I'm just asking the question.
Are you talking about joint ownership with the county?
No,
or
no,
joint
on the
ownership
road
with-
itself, on the privately held property that's an access road, maybe going to several properties. That's all. I'm just wondering if we're gonna run into trouble.
Well, so keep in mind that there are a lot of private roadways which receive bills right now.
Who receives the bill? I'm kinda
Yeah,
curious about
so
that.
there's a mailing address with the assessor's office for that roadway. So whoever,
The post office comes up with it, or the assessor does?
I think the
or-
assessor's office does, and so that bill gets mailed to that address.
Okay.
And then, I don't work in the assessor's office, but I would assume that the homeowners, you know, maybe it's one of the homeowners of the 6 that live on the roadway is the mailing address for
I'm
that
not
bill.
against what you're doing. I'm very
Yeah.
glad. I want you to succeed in what your endeavor is here, but the reality is, oftentimes, one portion of government doesn't know what the other portion of government is doing, or
So-
who's responsible.
So we currently mail bills to privately owned roads. We do.
Owners of some,
Owners of privately held roads, we do mail bills to them right now.
and it's just a couple dollars, is that what it is? Is that what I'm hearing?
The bill varies based upon how large the roadway is. And so these parcels, like this private roadway here, is only not receiving a bill because it has a use code of 79. So it's not the only roadway in the county
Are we gonna
that's
try and make
privately
this as
owned.
fair as we can? Is that what we're
That,
trying
that,
to do?
yes, that's, at the end of the day, yes.
And quick, as we can. It's after 10.
Okay.
So go ahead with you're finishing number 5?
Are there any other questions about number
No.
5?
You want any more questions?
Number 6?
Okay, I think I lost page number 6, hold on.
Right here.
Oh, okay. So to your question about billing privately owned roads. So there are currently some privately owned roads that do not have a current mailing address with the assessor's office. And so what is occurring right now is that those fees are assessed on the property, but then we have to write them off in order to prevent the privately owned road from going into tax sale, because we don't want to be in the business of owning more roads. And so what we are looking to do is, because those roads have maintenance agreements, is instead now for adding an option to our code that says if we do not have a current mailing address for a private roadway, we will instead split the bill amongst the property owners who that road is benefiting and apply it to their bills.
Okay, sounds fair.
It sounds fair, but is that a typical way it's done, or would you come up, I mean, did you come up with that yourself, or is that kind of a standard default provision?
I haven't researched other county codes, but I did check with our legal department to make sure that that was an okay
Past
way.
legal muster?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Number 7. So this has to do.
Let me go back to that real quick.
Uh-huh.
I'm imagining, did the lawyers talk about, I mean, is it always super clear, like who has access therefrom? I mean, I can imagine road connecting to another road. I mean, you could is there a definition there that is clear?
Usually it's on the plat to
Okay.
show who the benefiting property owners are and who has legal
Okay.
access to those parcels.
So that's not gonna create,
And or on their deed. I mean, it's running with it. If you're on a private road,
I
or
see.
you've got some easement, there's,
Okay.
if it's legal, and that's what we would be following, is that whatever that legal right is, we're gonna follow it.
okay,
that way.
sorry, go
And
ahead.
I like the italicized at the end of number 6. There is no increase in fee assessment, only an increase in ability to correct fees. About $3,000 in revenue would now be recoverable.
Is that correct?
Collect.
It's meant to
Should
be collect.
To collect fees.
Oh.
I knew there would be one spelling error calculated.
Found it by accident.
So those roads are already being assessed a fee, we just have no way to collect it because there's no
Address.
Right.
associated with it.
Okay.
Okay, I have one more, just quick, because it's an example that I can relate to a nightmare. Up in the upper right-hand corner on our photograph here, that is a development that was put in probably in the 60s on the Deschutes River. And I know the maintenance of that road is a nightmare to a lot of people. So I see we're doing something. I don't know exactly what you're doing there. So I'm not aware that there's a homeowners association there. So who gets the bill for some new process that we are creating? There's, I don't know, there looks to be 50 lots in there or something. We're gonna divide it up 50 ways and attach it to each property parcel number that's unique to each property? What's going on there? Are we gonna create ourselves a bunch of bureaucratic nightmare that's gonna almost be insurmountable in the end? I'm just using this as one example.
So in this case, if all of these homeowners are on their deed or given access to that road, then yes, we would be including them and splitting the bill 50 ways.
So you're gonna add 50 cents on everybody's property tax or something? I mean,
If that's what the split came out
it's
to
a
be, then
gravel
yes.
road.
Then yes,
I'm
they
sure
would.
now it's considered impervious under the new regulatory stuff.
It is, and so,
And those people don't pay for maintenance out there on the road anyway. It's just a big chuck hole. But, so.
That's if
how's it
there's no
gonna benefit?
address, right?
if there's no billing address, current billing address for
We
them.
don't know that necessarily, but if
Yeah.
they don't have an address on
Yeah,
file
I'm gonna
with the
guess
assessor.
there's not, because it was probably done way before there was any of this instituted, you know, any kind of stormwater or, I mean, there's problems out there. I'm not saying there aren't problems that need to be addressed. Is this gonna do it? And if this is one that I recognize, just happen to recognize sitting here, is there 100 of them just like this that we're gonna end up having to hire 5 more people to divide this up and bill, and
No.
we're gonna get $27 in benefit?
So based upon the 2018 assessor's data that we have, there are 9 of these types of parcels which don't have a current billing
Oh,
address.
so all the ones you're referring to are similar? Is that it?
There's different categories.
said there's 9.
But we're talking about, you asked the question about the private road, and if they're gonna be all of these. There are, according to the 2018 data, the assessor's records, there are 9 current private roads that do not have.
I know of some down in Rochester area, in over Chuckawa, off of Lawrence Lake. I mean, I can probably name about half of them, because I've been here around here so
So
for so long.
that might be one of the 9.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just trying to figure out, are we gonna do something that's gonna be beneficial in the long run, that's all. That's not gonna be overburdening, cause legal problems. I don't know. Pat, you kinda get what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've been involved in projects where you had the private roads that actually you don't put them on a separate parcel either. They're just easements against each of the adjoining properties.
Yeah,
So
that's kinda what I think this
That's another
is.
category where we have to allocate those roads to each of those parcels, I think. I don't think that's what
No.
you're talking, it's not what you're
We
talking about.
don't. So,
but we
so
don't.
if it's a roadway that's not a separate parcel, then they are billed based upon whatever class of property they fall into right now.
So they're
So we don't
just-
go in and, yeah, we don't go in right now and like allocate your portion of the road. This is only for roads that are separate parcels that don't have a current billing address.
Boy, I don't wanna belabor this and leave, you know, but it seems like we oftentimes make a lot of decisions that we're not really very familiar with as we move forward. And that's where we have to trust staff. And I'm just asking, you know, are we gonna end up with a little more problems than we think by doing
Well,
this? Compared to what we're doing now.
So we spoke with the legal department to make sure that this passed legal muster, and we also have been working closely with our billing specialist to make sure that these changes are actually implementable. And so he has already started to do some of the legwork to figure out, you know, how many of these parcels are there, how many parcels may be split amongst these fees. So we are sure that we can implement this.
There's gotta be hundreds, and many hundreds of lots that are probably affected. And what I'm worried about is we put something like this in place. I don't know that we're doing it right now, but I'm concerned that as we move forward trying to do it right, we end up we have to hire 3 more people to get this all right. And that's my concern.
Now, this is the very first overview that we've had on this
Yeah, so-
topic. Now, let me finish. an overview on this topic, and I don't really care who puts the stamp on the bill that comes into the county at this point. Let's move on with number 7, unless you want to answer that question specifically.
Well, it's like there's 257 parcels that we are estimating that the 9 roads would be split amongst.
Okay.
Okay, number 7.
So number 7 has to do with reporting requirements for lake management and drainage districts. So it was determined, and I don't remember what year it was in, that in some cases, lake management and drainage districts can perform some activities which meet the objectives of the stormwater utility, or have the ability to, based upon what those districts are established to do. And so one of the previous boards put in that they could receive a discount on their bills. And so we're just going back in and asking that those drainage districts, in order to continue receiving a discount on their bill, report back to us on what activities they are completing which meet the objectives of improving water quality. Because drainage districts, the number of activities that they're allowed to complete include things that don't directly meet the objectives of the stormwater utility, like maintaining lake levels. So, for example, if you're spending all your money on maintaining lake levels, then you're not doing any activities which meet the objectives of the stormwater utility for water quality, for instance.
I know you have someone that's.
Yep, I
Hold
got
on,
you.
go ahead.
Uh,
Yeah,
At this, so in terms of the change of I understand what the intent is, then is that compared to what we're doing now, do they have to report anything now?
Currently,
Or just basically like, you're a lake district, you get a 50% off, period?
correct.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So are we going to be requiring ourselves this report, since we're providing assistance, technical assistance to the lake management districts? So are we imposing this report to ourselves, in particular in your division?
Yes. Yes.
So, so what you're saying is, in order to continue to have the 50% break on the stormwater fees, any lake management district, aside from the special use district, which is Black Lake, that perhaps the only lake district that can be subject to this change, they need to provide a report. What we're saying is, we, the county, since we provide administrative support to those 2 lake management districts, we are going to be submitting to yourself. I'm just talking. So you're going to prepare the report. You're going to be submitting to yourself and check the box.
Yeah. So I will say that this change was requested by Tim Wilson, who is our division manager and used to manage.
I know who Tim is.
Yeah.
I know who Tim is.
So this was a change that he specifically requested, and he did in our conversations discuss the fact that it would be our own staff who would be generating the reports. But he felt that the accountability was needed to make sure that if we are giving people a discount, then we're giving them a discount for completing an activity that is substantially similar to something that our own stormwater utility would do.
Commissioner Edwards, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I think this comes back to, I'll just use Long Lake as one of the examples, that they oftentimes allege that the county is responsible for, like, I'm going to say 12 culverts that come from roadway ditches that run into Long Lake. And thus, those folks are paying a lot of extra taxes to keep their lake clean. And they're always alleging that the county should pay more into this kitty to help keep the lake clean. So I don't know how this would affect them, because I do think they get some benefit of a 50% reduction within a certain area in that lake management district. So
The whole district.
yeah, so before I was inclined to move forward on something like this, I want to hear what those lake management district people might say. Pat, what I'd like to have you do is go back and ask some of your prior peers that have been involved in some of this stuff, are we creating additional problems for citizens in the future based on what was done in the past? I know our intent is well, and we're trying to do some cleanup and get some things fixed, but again, I just hate to move forward on things that have some unforeseen consequences that we're just not really familiar with. And I know you folks are wondering probably why people like me don't get it, and but I don't deal in it all the time, so maybe I'm a little denser than most. But I really think that we need to take into consideration all those other perimeters that maybe we're missing. I don't know that we're missing them, but just on a couple of these things that I recognize, and now the 50% issue is listed in number 7, has been a bugaboo for some of those lake management districts already. So
Them getting a discount has been a bugaboo?
well, the fact that the county doesn't pay in their fair share, for an example, the state pays in a share to their district because of impact they might have. And I think part of that has to do with maybe public accesses or something like that. I just don't think everything is being answered here yet for me to go ahead and creating, I don't know if we're creating additional regulation or less regulation, but a combination of things that this might be detrimental to some citizens. I want to make sure before I may move forward, that's all.
Robin?
I'm just curious if there is a time-sensitive nature to this. Does it need to be passed by a certain time? Do you want it passed by the end of the year? What is the time sensitivity of this item?
The potential sunsetting of the rates, so the feedback that we got from legal was that there could be an interpretation with the way that the language is written regarding the rates, that it would be
So that's on the bottom of the
not
table?
able to.
So
That's-
there's one
Yeah.
particular thing that must be passed by the end of this year, by?
Yeah, so based off of, I mean, this is what we're doing, is kind of presenting this and getting feedback from the board as to what additional questions they have, so we can look at, we may come back and separate some of these things out. You know, I feel strongly that our process should be when we open up something, we start looking at it, that we're in there, let's go through and review it.
Right.
If there's issues that are coming up that are gonna take more time, more conversation, more clarification that's needed, I think that behooves us to then separate them out to address what we actually need to get addressed, and move forward on that, or at least the request to move forward, and then deal with the other items.
Yeah,
Where's that piece on here that deals with the sunsetting?
on the
That
table,
confuses. On the table?
bottom of the table,
What page is that?
on the bottom of the table.
We have to have a little fun in these meetings, don't we? Otherwise they get kind of dry.
Oh,
And that is really the
B
key.
as in boy.
And if I may, I appreciate,
Doesn't look like any of the 7
uh-huh.
that speaks to that.
And I appreciate the perspective, Jennifer. And I do. There is every time there is an opportunity to change the code, might as well have an opportunity to change holistically some of the elements within the code. But my concern is, based on today's conversation, there's a lot of questions related to the other elements that you're proposing that perhaps is going to sacrifice or jeopardize the main intent that you have, that you'd like to achieve before the end of the year, which is really the perception of the sunsetting date. I think it will be an opportunity maybe for you and I to discuss offline a little bit as to how we can repackage this proposal.
Okay, wasn't on here because we didn't consider it a major change.
thank you. Go ahead. Go
I
ahead,
just,
Ty.
looking at these 7, and just my perspective is that there's a pretty big difference between 1 through 6 and then number 7. 7 has got, you know,
Yeah.
I would think that 1 through 6 we could deal with maybe, and maybe there's more discussion about 7 because it's definitely got a policy component that and a public, you know, that's one where I'd kind of agree that I'd kind of like to hear what the lake management districts would say about this, but that's just my perspective. Most of these, I think, are very, they're clean. If they're cleanups, we should get them done and not piece it out into 7 different or whatever, because that's just going to be inefficient. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you for dealing with a very
Thank
complicated
you.
situation and set of facts.
With complicated people here. And that concludes this session. We're taking a break now before we go into budget.
I didn't,